The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking, Insights and Issues. I'm your host, Dave Szollosy. This is the special show we do, the annual Year in Review show, looking at the major news stories and newsmakers impacting our lives here in Georgina. We're going to go through in sequence the major news story of the year, then some uniquely Georgina stories, broader issues affecting us, and finally, what to look forward to in 2021. I'm thrilled to be able to be joined today by a panel of distinguished local journalists. I'm welcoming Karen Wolf, the host of Rogers TV, Politically Speaking, Michael Anderson, editor of the Georgina Post, and Amanda Persico, reporter with the York Region Media Group. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today on this show.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And good to see everyone well on that. So we were initially having some email conversation. It was kind of obvious what the major news story for 2020 is, and that's the pandemic. But maybe in this show, in the first segment too, let's try to dig in a little bit deeper to start this conversation off. So I'd like to ask you, what aspect of COVID frames the most important or significant story for us that characterizes this year? We might have some different takes on that issue. Maybe Amanda, would you like to start with us? Like, what do you see as that defining aspect of COVID?
Sure. Thank you. You look at the numbers, especially in Georgina with River Glenhaven, and they were daunting and heartbreaking. My heart goes out to all the family members associated with that. But for me, just how COVID impacted everyday life, from prices of dairy going up in the grocery store, a lumber shortage across the country, drywall prices, supplies, everything is going up, everything is changing. With birthday gifts for kids, you get a gift and a mask, right? You have your keys, wallet, mask kind of thing. And it comes all the way down the line. People couldn't get marriage licenses, no swimming lessons. It was just those simple things. Everything has changed. The fact that we're on here on Zoom now is one of those aspects. And how long this is going to go on, I don't know. So.
I know you made the comment about the shortages in grocery stores. I remember being so surprised and shocked at the outset, because I'd go there and, what are the local stores out of? Toilet paper, flour, and my kind of milk. I mean, but that's exactly what we do here in Canada. We cut trees, we grow wheat, and we have dairy cattle. How can we be low in that stuff?
And it came in cycles. Sorry.
Yeah.
My neighbor is a realtor at one of the big box stores, and she would tell me, okay, if you need hair color in a box, that's flying off the shelf. And I think that happened about 3 months in. The next thing was like summer items, pool stuff, pool noodles, that's gone. Sleds. So it goes in these cycles, what people are doing naturally, that you would just go to the store, but everybody's home, everybody's doing them at the same time. So it's not just one particular shortage, it's just everything.
I think we also sold out of bicycles in the country this summer. Mm-hmm. Michael, what would you tie into as the defining aspect of this pandemic?
I have a confession to make. I was a toilet paper hoarder. My wife's friend in Virginia called us and told us that the shelves were empty of toilet paper, and then I should go out and buy some. So I went to the No Frills in Sutton and filled in 2 carts with toilet paper. And this was before people started even buying the toilet paper. And I got a lot of weird looks, and I felt a little bit bad about it, but I had to answer to my wife. So
you're the one that's responsible for our shortage of toilet paper here in Georgina.
That's right. I still have it, actually, if you want some. I have quite a lot back there. But anyhow, that's just a personal thing. I mean, what struck me and what is striking me is just how remarkable the response from the community has been to this terrible situation. It's really almost like a war footing we're in. And essentially how people have rallied together, supported each other. An example would be a lot of seniors who are isolated and lonely, and how people have reached out to them to try to connect to them. Different social agencies in the community and all the efforts that they've made. It's quite remarkable. And I think, it's one of those things, COVID is a great revealer. It shows the positive as well as the negative. And I think we shouldn't forget the positive as well. There's a lot of negative. So, a lot of people have rallied together. Our town, our municipality has tried to do its best to support local businesses in their time of need. These are all good things.
Okay, we'll delve into some of these aspects maybe deeper after. But and when you said Virginia, I'm assuming you
I mean U.S. state.
Right, no, not Virginia in Georgina.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Karen, what images do you bring us for the defining aspect of this lead story, the biggest story?
Well, I guess for me, when they announced that it was a state of emergency and we were all locked down, and just what that meant to everyone. I mean, right across the board, every age group, it was, what it meant to local businesses and the impact, the devastating impact it's had on them, the lockdown, residents. Mental health, was huge when we were all locked down. And of course, what was happening to our hospitals, and there was no PPE, and what that meant to the healthcare system. It was the initial, this is, we're all locked down. You're in your house, you're going to go for groceries, and that's where you're going to go, and that's what you're going to do. And just what that meant to absolutely every segment of our Georgina population, and how dramatic it was almost from one day to the next.
Now, Karen, too, when you were talking about the lockdown and the impact on individuals, one aspect of that was the lake closing. And I think this is particular in our area, that the fact that the access to beaches were restricted, boat launches were not allowed to operate initially. Did that exacerbate the impact of the situation for Georgina, or how well did you see us accommodate that aspect of COVID?
Well, certainly, I think this was one of the hottest summers on record, and that lake would have come in really handy, to help with the weather that we were going through, the hot, dry summer. And people, there were all kinds of schools of thought there. The residents thought, open it up for us. Because we're fairly safe up here. I mean, at that time, the numbers in Georgina were 0. We didn't have any cases when we were being locked down. So people couldn't really understand, why we weren't given access to it, but certainly understand why once you open them, you're also opening up to people who did have cases and high cases. And so, there were a couple of schools of thought on that, but definitely it had an impact on us because that lake is part of our culture and part of our lifestyle.
Can I talk a little bit to that?
Yeah.
I was a bit critical a couple of times about the municipality and how it responded in that situation. I mean, there were a lot of people who don't have lakefront, don't have boats, and were basically denied the access to the water. And it was particularly galling, like I'd walk down to Willow Beach where I have a cottage and see all these boaters out there frolicking around and having a great time, and, through a snow fence.
Yeah.
So it didn't seem very fair. And I certainly got a lot of emails and calls from people who were not happy with the situation. And I'm glad that the town opened to LaSalle. Although it seemed like a little bit of an overkill in terms of the cost and the procedures that were involved, but it worked. So kudos to them. the thing I'd like to say is that we were quite late in opening a beach. If you look at Innisfil, they were a month before us. I think there was a lot of wasted time and a lot of sort of second guessing going on. And, you know, and to speak to Karen's area in Pefferlaw, I mean, it never opened Holmes Point. So you have to drive all the way to De La Salle to go for a swim. And I don't think that was fair.
Well, I noticed that some of it was even pushed because in areas along Lake Drive where the town had fenced off areas, you could see where the fences had been broken, people had been climbing over. There began to be a disrespect isn't really the strong enough word, but people started taking out their resistance towards closures just personally, just by ignoring it. And going
I agree,
in.
but you know, you're going to get some of that. I mean, people drive up here regardless. And I saw this often where you see a family pull up, you know, the beach wasn't open and they would just park the car and hop the fence. I mean, that's going to happen. And that's why you have bylaw officers, and that's why you have, you know, York Regional Police, and that stuff has to be, it's going to happen. You're always going to have that. I mean, we're a recreational area. We're by a lake. You know, you're going to get that kind of thing happening. I'm not sure it was like intentional mass demonstrations against the control, you know, like we've seen in some places, you know.
Just thinking about the lake, I was thinking about that myself. I'm an outsider. You know, I'm one of those people that kind of drive up there to enjoy the lake, and we did actually in March and got stopped by the police. But it got me thinking, you know, who actually owns the lake? We hear a lot about, you know, water is life, and water should be available to everyone. And I was actually really impressed at the steps that the town took to open De La Salle. And I know what Mike was saying, it was late, but you still look at all the parking issues that happened after. If you couldn't get into a beach, people were parking on lawns. You've got situations with Rover. So I think that opened up the idea that the beach is a destination for everybody, residents, everyone alike, and let's get the waterfront study going and make it an actual destination for people. Proper parking, proper fees for parking as well, and stuff to do, restaurants, and boost that local economy and use the lake and optimize on it.
Before we end this segment on the COVID, I think we want to re-emphasize from my perspective, I think the most horrific story, something Amanda referred to at the beginning of hers, was the COVID and long-term care, and especially here in Georgina, how it impacted us at the Cedar Vale and River Glen Haven nursing homes. When we saw the reality of people in the community, the tragedy of people getting seriously ill, both caregivers and residents in those facilities, when we saw the people dying from this, I think it brought home to the community in a very dramatic way the intense seriousness of this disease.
Can I speak to that just for, I don't want to interrupt you, but
sure. No.
That is still unfolding. There are civil suits against AT Care from family members. There has been no real inquiry into what has occurred there. And I'm hoping that the provincial commission will actually look and see what transpired there, because, you know, I'm a firm believer that many people did not have to die there.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of studies showing that it was poor policy planning that allowed and, in fact, forced workers in those homes to work in multiple facilities. And that's
part of the
accelerated the spread.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
You just have to read the mandatory management order that was issued by the Ministry of Long-Term Care when South Lake took over, and it's in black and white. It pretty much explains a failure by the clinical and management team there. So it has to be examined. Even the town itself had written a letter, the mayor had written a letter to the premier asking for, not necessarily, you know, River Glen specifically, but there does need to be a public inquiry.
And that's something that the province has shut down right now. When we come back, we want to look at Georgina issues in particular. Stay with us. Welcome back to Politically Speaking, Insights and Issues. Today's show, we're talking about the year in review 2020 and what it meant to us. A lot of people are going to be glad to see it gone. This segment, we want to look at particularly uniquely Georgina stories. So I'm going to ask my distinguished panel here, what uniquely Georgina story would you see as the biggest one that impacted the community most significantly this year? I think we're going to have some different responses. And I also know that some of the issues we're going to be some of the issues we're going to be talking about are repeats from last year and the years before, which is in itself a bit of a story. Karen, well, why don't you start us off on this segment? What's the biggest story for you?
I could be very selfish here and certainly say that the Pefferlaw Dam and the issues around that is the number one story in Georgina, although I'm really not sure that that's the case across Georgina. So I would really want to focus on the waterfront strategy that has been going on practically, for the year, actually. I mean, this is something I think that should have been done years ago, that we are way, way behind on this. Sorry.
And you and I have mentioned that point over the year-end review stories, the shows, for the last couple of years, at least.
Yeah, and I'm happy to see that finally we've got something going here. I've been in on the calls that the consultants have had, the Zoom calls, asking for residents to give their feedback on, what they want to see out of this. And then they came back a second time with some concept plans and asked for feedback on that. I was very disappointed. I'll be honest. I was extremely disappointed with the concept that they came back for Holmes Point. And certainly, again, selfishly, that's the part of Lake Simcoe that, affects me and this community most. They really didn't know Holmes Point at all.
Why was that, Karen? Is that because people didn't contribute enough, or the contributions were discounted, or
I don't think they did their research. They couldn't tell us what the capacity of the beach was. They couldn't, and I mean that was important. The capacity of that beach is going to dictate, how many washrooms to put in there, how much parking to put in there. They doubled the damn, pardon my French, they doubled the parking in the concept, but yet the beach is overloaded with the parking we have now. So I was very disappointed what they came back with. And there has to be another concept presented to this community about that beach in order for us to really go forward and get what we really need there. But I'm glad to see they're doing it. I mean, I will give them full marks for finally saying this is something this community really has to get a handle on, because we can't continue to deal with the problems that Lake Simcoe causes without us having everything in place to support that lake. Mm-hmm. I mean, go take a look at Aurelia and see what they have done, and they are prepared for the visitors to come to that town and for the economic activity that those visitors bring. They're all prepared for it. You can go and park there free and go to the beach and walk to the shops. I know that's a little issue, but certainly they looked at what they had and said, okay, how can we, really benefit? And I don't think we've done that.
I just wanted to add to what Karen was saying. I took part in a couple of the discussions, Willow Beach and Jackson's Point Harbor. And I came the first round, and I came away feeling the same, that it was great to hear the input from residents, and they seemed to be listening to that. And it was a very good start, I thought. And again, when I saw some of the renderings that came forth out of that, I was pretty pleased with Willow Beach, but I was confused by some of the other ones, to be honest with you. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Karen was saying about Holmes Point. I don't know if they didn't do their research, or it didn't seem to be addressing the issues there. So, but the bigger concern to me is just who's going to pay for all of this. I mean,
Yeah.
What is the price tag on this? Because and how are we going to pay for it? I mean, my understanding, and I might be wrong, is that development charges can only be levied towards a new park. So you can't renovate a park with development charges. So all this would have to come from the tax levy, I imagine.
Yes, except I asked that question of our treasurer when I saw the budget. I was confused, or not confused, but I wondered why, when they were putting money away for a new fire hall in the future, why they hadn't decided to put some money away for the recommendations coming out of this study. Like, why aren't you doing that? Because we're going to have to pay for it. And there seems to be the $4.2 million that we have squirreled away from tax levy that was supposed to go toward our share of the MERC, which no longer has to happen because 100% of the MERC now is going to be paid for by DCs. We have that
development charges, DCs.
Yes, right. We have that $4.2 million, and I'm expecting that that's the account we're going to go to address some of the recommendations coming out of the study. But absolutely, there's no sense doing this study, have it sit and collect dust on a shelf somewhere if you're not going to go move forward with some of the recommendations. That must happen.
And that's why I'm a little bit concerned, because as you say, unless you have money attached to something, it's not happening. And I don't know if this would qualify for some sort of infrastructure funding from the province. I mean, hopefully in the recovery phase, more monies are going to be available. And if we have projects ready to go, I just don't know if a park, a beachfront, help me here, Karen. I don't know. Does that qualify as infrastructure?
Sure, it does. Yeah. I mean,
okay, so maybe that might be a route
proposal together, but I can't see why someone at the town couldn't put an application together and go for some of the money that's coming down the pipe here.
Okay, maybe we should move on from this one. Okay, the waterfront master plan, major story. Michael, what would you suggest one of the other key stories for Georgina this year?
Well, I've already touched on one that's important, which was River Glen and what happened there. So I don't want to belabor that, but I do want to mention that the Ford government has passed a bill 218, and that's going to make it extremely difficult for families to sue in court for damages and to find information and justice for what happened.
If it protects the owners without...
It protects the owners. It raises the bar in civil court in terms of negligence. It's now gross negligence. It's a much more higher bar and much more difficult and costly. So it's a difficult situation, I understand, but I really feel that the Ford government should have gone that route. And I think, there are a lot of very good private owners. I don't want to paint them all. But I think that where you've seen significant deaths, they need to be, investigated. And if there is negligent, there has to be civil suits. That's how we find the answers in our society. So apart from that, moving on, I was very impressed with a couple of gentlemen this year, Dave Neeson and Gibbons, and their fight with the DG group. And basically it was David
the DG group is the developers group that you're talking about.
And the MLE lands, and how that forest was protected and looks like it's going to be protected in perpetuity. So I think that was a very big environmental story for our community, and it's been going on, and Karen and other media outlets have covered this. I mean, it's not something unique that I've covered, but I certainly think that was a real win for the community and for the people around the lake.
The trouble is with the North Golden Bay Forest, and I know that's been once again, one of the stories that we've been dealing with year after year after year, and it's been a long struggle. You're right. Jack Gibbons has been very, very faithful in maintaining the struggle for the preservation of something that was already declared a provincially significant wetland. But at the risk of crossing over into our next topic,
which you are going to be doing.
Yeah. The problem is when you said it looks like it's being preserved in perpetuity. Just had some guests on a previous edition of the show looking at the government budget bill 229 and how they snuck in Schedule 6 that is really problematic in removing the responsibility and the power of conservation authorities and increasing ministerial orders so that I actually put it to the opposition critic, and we kind of came up with a positive response that the minister could simply now change their mind on the zoning and the permissions on the North Goldenberry Forest and allow the development to go ahead. There's no guarantee at this point in time.
That's entirely possible, but I think the public appetite for that is like zero. So I think you'd have the whole community up in arms if they did that. I don't think the municipality supports it. LPAT ruled against it. Sure, I mean, if you're in a fascist society, the government can do whatever it wants, right? But we have the courts, and we have individuals who are willing to stand up and protect things like Jack Gibbons and Dave Neeson. So I don't think it's going to happen.
Maybe not, but I mean, making it legal means that there is no appeal to the courts. I want to get to Amanda before we end the segment, though. Amanda.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So for me, just kind of going back to what Karen said and going back to the lake, there's so many facets from the lake. The Upper York sewage solution, the phosphorus loading, and the investments that are going on. And even just going back to what I said before, parking with the beaches closed and the parking facilities and just making the streets safer. I talked to a lot of residents this year talking about speeding. And one of the things I heard from a lot of people was people coming into Georgina, going to the beach, driving by, and they're speeding, they're ripping through roads. And the road structure, the speed limits, I think that is going to play a big part in 2021 in the spring with all the safety measures that they've put in place. And I think people are starting to talk about road safety and the actual physical road, the shape of the road, the makeup of the road. I'm hearing a lot of complaints about the asphalt and the grading that is not done to par. I think that's going to be something that residents will carry forward next year.
Yeah, and Amanda, you're absolutely right. At council, we know that there is something of like $20 million or $200 million of work that needs to be done on our roads that we have just let go. We're supposed to be spending something like $4 million a year on roads, and we're lucky to spend $2 million.
Yeah.
So what that has done over the years there's a huge backlog of work that has to be done on our road system. And it's just going to get worse before it gets better. It's just going to pile up until, we finally decide that that's what our focus should be. And when you go back to why municipalities were founded in the first place, the first thing that they were given as a responsibility was roads. And it seems now when we look at the budget, the roads are the things that doesn't get the attention or is at the bottom of every list. So we really have to, turn our thinking around there.
So Karen, the gas tax rebate that comes to the municipalities was originally, historically, dedicated towards preservation of roads. Where is the gas tax rebate going to now then?
I know you can use gas tax to do parks. You can use gas tax to do a dozen other things that I don't believe it should be used for. It should be used when I buy my gas at the pumps, the tax that I'm paying, I want to go back into the road system that I'm using.
Yeah, it's used as a slush fund basically to
pretty much
to finance any kind of project. And I agree with you, Karen. It should be focused on roads. We need to repair a lot of the roads, and I really don't understand why we need artificial intelligence to tell us that the road is bad.
And with that, we're going to have to bring this section to a close.
I mean,
Stay with us, please, and carry on talking about some of the broader questions affecting Georgina in the year 2020. Hi, welcome back to Politically Speaking, Insights and Issues. This show, we're talking about the Year in Review 2020, and I'm joined by my esteemed panel of Karen Wolf, Michael Anderson, and Amanda Persico. And we were talking in the last segment about uniquely Georgina stories for 2020, and I don't think we came anywhere near dealing with them all. So there's a few more we should touch on before we move on in this segment. And Michael, I'm going to ask you the question first. What is happening with the Pefferlaw Fire Hall? Where is that?
Well, I haven't really referred to it, but it's essentially a black eye for Build Georgina. It's sort of one of the first projects out of the gate, and it's become a debacle. Essentially, they had to terminate the contract with the contractor, and they're now proceeding with a civil suit to recoup some of the funds or most of the funds that they've paid already. It's by no means given that they will win that civil suit. The insurance company says that the contractor was not in default. So it's possible that this could be a long, protracted, drawn out situation where you don't get the money back, and essentially you're paying double for a fire hall. So that's basically what's happening. Even they admit that it's impacted the budget this year. So it's a mess. So I'm glad it's going to be done and completed. It's certainly way over schedule, but it is a bit of a black eye. And when you think about the major capital builds that the town is embarking on, you really have to sort of question how they're managing these projects. I mean, are we going to go into cost overruns on the Merc? Are we going to go on cost overruns on the new Civic Center? How much is this going to cost? So it's troubling.
But the Civic Center is off the table for now.
Off the table, but I mean, it's still going to proceed probably. So.
We can't leave talking about Pefferlaw without addressing one of the major issues for Pefferlaw this last year. And I want to look at Karen. The Pefferlaw Dam, where is that in the story? What has happened this year? Where is it now?
Well, you know what? It's really frustrating for all the residents here because, we got a group together, the Friends of the Dam, and we've been working really, really hard to get some movement among, the political at all levels of government, really, to get some kind of movement around what we're going to do, because we don't want to be back in March and someone not put the stop logs in again this year. We don't want to go there. So the big stumbling block is getting the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority to admit they own it. We have all kinds of research and documentation that proves they own it. The Ontario government has sent 2 communiques to the LSRCA saying they own it. And yesterday just came up with another one where there's a map of all the dams in Ontario. When you click on the Pefferlaw one, comes up owned by the Conservation Authority. So I don't know what else they need to stand up and say we own it, because we need that someone to admit ownership, so then we can go and lobby for the funding that's needed to fix it. But nobody's going to write a check for a project that doesn't have an owner. So someone has to stand up and say we own it, and then we can lobby for the money to get it fixed. And that's what's most frustrating, is because the LSRCA has just dug their heels in and says we don't own it, but they do. They absolutely do. I'd go to court if I had the money to prove that they do.
Now,
I don't understand the argument that basically they can't open a land registry office because of COVID and can't research the title. I don't get that. I mean, I've hired researchers to go in and check land title. It's one person.
Well, forgive the pun. forgive the pun, Mike, but that argument doesn't hold water.
Yeah. But, you know, it's just frustrating. I can see the frustration. They should be able to provide these answers. I mean, they're, you know, if you've been maintaining an asset for so many years and you still don't know you own it, I don't understand that. So the only thing I'd like to point out is in the budget, there doesn't seem to be any money allocated for the Pefferlaw Dam.
In the Georgina budget, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, there's a minimal amount for dam repair. And also I read something that was interesting, and I hope I'm incorrect in this, that I know the town had to pay half the repairs to get the stop logs in, but according to the budget, it seems like they've taken that money from the Pefferlaw Recreational Fund. So I'm not quite sure how that plays in Pefferlaw, but it just doesn't seem to be a priority. It's not in the budget.
So some of our other questions here now, we're starting to cross into other jurisdictions like the Conservation Authority. One thing I do want us to touch on is a story happened at the end of the year regarding the phosphorus treatment facility for water into Lake Simcoe. Now that's been something that people have been calling for again for decades, trying to cut down the phosphorus loading in the lake. Amanda, you were following that story, eh?
I was, and the announcement kind of came out of nowhere, and doing a little research after that, there's no actual physical project. There's still 3 or 4 years out. So to me, it kind of seemed it was more of about campaign and rah government. We're doing this when there's actually nothing behind it. But to go along with that, we also have the Upper York sewage systems. That has been, I covered that when I covered East Gwillimbury 10 years ago. Like, I hate to say this, but shit or get off the pot at this point. Right? And, you know, pun intended on that one too.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that there's a decision coming in the new year. There's been a lot of talks, a lot of closed door sessions, and now there's the report that came out of Durham region. It just kind of seems it's a whole mess, and I think $100 million has been spent by the region at this point. Where is that money going to go?
If I could just
very interesting thing. The Georgina Council did finally pass a resolution, a motion.
That's right.
Calling on the province to not proceed
to cancel
with the
it
Upper
out.
York sewage solution,
Right.
but that only happened after a letter was sent by the ministry to the region. That's something Mike and I know have been talking about a lot. This secret letter that I believe it's just been made public, though, Michael. That's
right. So back in July, I spoke to Dave. Actually, I spoke to Rob Grossi about this letter that was sent by the Minister of the Environment, Minister Urick, to York Regional Council. It was marked confidential, so basically it was not made public. In the letter, which I now have a copy of, basically the province is signaling that the Upper York sewage solution may be abandoned. It looks like they want to look at other alternatives, including
the original one.
Yeah, the original one, which is to send it to Duffins Creek. So, you know, all of this boils down to a plan that really didn't make any sense to begin with, you know. I saw a very good documentary about a plant in California that's very similar to what they're proposing. It's cutting edge technology, but, you know, it creates wastewater that you can drink. And that's the big selling point, right? But it discharges that into the Pacific Ocean. We were talking about Lake Simcoe.
Yeah.
And the analogy is Olympic-sized swimming pool being Lake Ontario and Lake Simcoe being a thimble. You cannot put 40 million liters of treated waste into a lake the size of Simcoe every day. And that's what it is.
And not only that, Mike, too, but even the studies that you're referring to never considered examining personal care products and pharmaceuticals.
That's another issue.
Recent research is coming out showing the disastrous impact that those have on human health, especially in the drinking water. And Simcoe, which primarily loses its water through evaporation, rather than flowing out like Lake Ontario goes out through the St. Lawrence to the ocean. Simcoe is just by evaporation. So all these, even though it's a smaller amount of phosphorus, they could contend, that's still more phosphorus being added. That's still more pharmaceuticals being added, more personal care products. And it just gets concentrated during the evaporation process.
What surprised
me? Not a good metaphor.
I was going to say what surprised me is, you've got Friends of the Pefferlaw Dam, Friends of the Pefferlaw River. There's no resident outcry against this project. And in East Gwillimbury, you see the residents come up and they've been coming to council talking about it. And I was really surprised that it took Georgina Council this long. Mind you, I'm just stepping in and I'm new to learning everything about Georgina. It took them this long to say no to this project.
Well, I think the citizens group, if you want to say that, that really has stepped up against this project has been the Chippewas of Georgina Island.
That's right.
They're the ones that really raised the flag and said, there hasn't been the consultation that, you should have had. There's issues with this project, and they never let go. I mean, they really never, ever backed down and backed away from the fact that this project is not good for the lake. And I think credit has to be given to them for government to take a step back and say, okay, should we be looking at another alternative here? And I think that's the citizens group that had, the most influence with the provincial government here.
If I can just
I have to say too, though, here, I just got to say here too, the previous council, though, the second previous council was the one that really came forward, drawing it into the highlight, because initially Georgina was left out of the mix for consultation and information sessions altogether.
Yeah,
completely excluded.
They weren't part of it because it was going to be in East Gwillimbury, even though we were getting all the pollution into the lake. It was Georgina Council that demanded public hearings, that demanded the region come before it, and made the initial objections. I know former Councillor Phil Craig and I were, and former Mayor Grossi and I were kind of leading a lot of the opposition in those meetings to the suppositions there. Michael?
If I could just add a couple of points to that. First, to Karen's, this was basically a done deal if it wasn't for the Chippewas.
Yeah.
The environmental assessment was, according to the region and the province, was completed. It was all systems go, except they failed to consult the Chippewas. And that was the big hurdle and obstacle. And that's probably what's done this project in, and thank God. To the point of Rob Grossi, he campaigned on this issue. So I think some of our local politicians were in the forefront of opposing this, and really it's a major issue in this community. If you talk to anyone, I mean, I've been to a couple of the presentations given by York Region on this solution and water treatment, and they're very slick. They're based on science. I don't have any criticism, but if you talk to regular folks around the lake, they are not in support of this. I mean, wholeheartedly. I haven't talked to anyone who says, yes, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Karen, you wanted to get in something on the current provincial budget bill. We have about a minute now.
Oh, okay. We started talking a little bit about it, and I know that it's kind of cutting the legs off the conservation authorities in a number of ways. But we're
talking Schedule 6 attached to the provincial budget.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the first question you have to ask is, what is Schedule 6 doing in a budget bill? That might be one of the first things you ask. But there are some things in it that I agree with. In other words, I don't think that we should there's something in it that I think we should keep instead of just dismissing the entire Schedule 6. And one of them is this: I've never really agreed with our councillors sitting on the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority and being forced to support the LSRCA's decision, and especially if they're sitting there with a council decision, a Georgina council decision that is totally on.
And that finishes us the last words. Stay with us as we look to 2021 in the next segment. Hi, you're watching Politically Speaking, Insights and Issues, and I'm your host, Dave Szollosy. We've been reviewing the year 2020 and what a year it's been. A lot of news stories. We hardly gotten to a number of the stories that we wanted to speak about today, but in this segment, I'd like us to try something just a little bit different. With my panel here, I'm going to ask us to have some fun. I'm going to invite each one of us to prognosticate and predict the most impactful story of 2021 for Georgina. So looking ahead, based upon what we've been going through, what's going to be the big story of the coming year? Michael, do you want to start us off on this?
That's really hard. I mean, are you picking on me because my surname is A?
No, because I've started one segment with Karen.
I'm not really great at crystal balls. I think that coming out of COVID is going to be a big situation for the community. I've always thought that, we should really not be lumped in with the rest of York region. Our cases are low, our positivity rate is low. So, when we're confronted with a potential lockdown in York region, which could still occur if you look at the cases, they're going up. So, we need to be separated somehow. I don't know how it's done, but I know that this was asked of Dr. Kurji by the mayor.
And Dr. Kurji is our regional officer of health.
That's right.
For York region.
He deflected that question and basically said administratively it's too difficult. But I don't think it's too difficult. So I really like to see us separated when it comes to COVID from the rest of York region. I think the impact for us has been severe on small businesses. I speak to them, the restaurants. We're mostly mom and pop businesses here. Mm-hmm. We don't have a lot of big retail, and these people are suffering, and they may lose their businesses. There may be bankruptcies. And how do we recover from that? So I think that's going to be a big story going forward. Maybe the role of the town may have to be expanded in terms of helping. I'm not saying they have to underwrite all the businesses in Georgina. I wouldn't say that, but essentially, we may have to look at other measures, and I think they are considering other measures, more than just simply grants of $7,500. Maybe there's some sort of commercial rent subsidy. Maybe there's other means in terms of shop local, subsidizing some sort of card that encourages people to get a discount when they shop local. These are all sort of ideas that have been talked about, but we're going to need some money as well. And that means going to the region and going to the province and going to the feds and lining up like everybody else. And really, our politicians have to advocate really strongly for this region and get the money that we need, because we're. And
that was one of the things I wanted us to talk about a little bit in the first segment that we didn't get to, is the impact of COVID on local businesses. And you're right, we have been seeing it. I don't know the numbers of businesses that already haven't survived.
Well, I
let's Amanda, what for you, what do you see coming up as the biggest story for 2021 in the year ahead?
Along the same lines, the end of COVID, but the reopening of facilities and getting back to regular activities, especially for mental health and for the youth in the community, something to do, somewhere to go, reopening businesses, getting back on track. And I just have to put a plug out to the Georgina Chamber. Having followed them all the way along and living myself in a different community, they're doing an amazing job promoting shop local. The holiday catalog that they've put forward, no other chamber has done anything like that. And I feel like the Georgina Chamber has been at the front of this with the shop local campaign and their logo, and they're really pushing it for the size of Georgina, the size that they are. They've done a great job, and I wish them all the best in the future in 2021. And that's another thing, is just opening up and getting the shops open. Vaccines. That's going to be a big one. We're hearing from Dr. Kurji that the general public is not going to get them till later in 2021. What does that mean for Georgina? There was a lot of talk about testing, getting local testing done up in the area. Is that going to be the same thing for getting local vaccines up in the area, mobile sites, clinics, stuff like that?
Okay. Karen,
Yeah, I mean,
your prognostication for 2021.
well, it's vaccines as far as I'm concerned, and just, you know, when they're going to get here to Georgina, and then prioritizing, you know, who's going to get it and when they're going to get it. And certainly, I think everybody's waiting for the removal of the mask requirement. I think that's, you know, once we get there, I think we're going to feel like we're, you know, we see the light at the end of the tunnel when we don't have to wear a mask anymore. And that's probably not going to happen until the majority of us have the vaccine. But I think coming out of COVID, that's going to be the story, and how we get out and how well we get out. And that's going to speak to small business, you know, take a look around and see which ones were able to survive, which ones didn't. And that's a huge story.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think. Go ahead, Amanda.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump on with small business and recovery. There's a note that we're kind of missing here, e-commerce. We're seeing a lot of, you know, don't shop on Amazon, go to the local stores. But to make people feel comfortable shopping local, e-commerce needs to be there. Broadband needs to be there. So there's those economic steps that need to take place to boost recovery and boost those businesses.
Yeah, it is.
Well,
I mean,
you know what? We're running out of time now, and we're going to have to draw this to a close. I agree. I think it's not only the when the vaccine, but also the equity and distribution of it to prioritize the vulnerable sectors. But Karen, Michael, Amanda, thank you very, very much for coming on the show. I think it's been a great conversation. I hope it's been worthwhile to our audience. And have a wonderful new year. This is Dave Szollosy for Politically Speaking, Insights and Issues.